played it safe your whole life. So let's get naughty and break a couple rules tonight. Sneak in a movie no one will ever know. Then run on private property and hold each other close. Beneath the moonlight, I've got a fun idea. Lean and kiss a cheek and gently whisper in your ear. Let's steal a car tonight. Commit a felony with me and drive until the sunrise. Let's steal a motherfucking car tonight. Young and alive. So let's commit some crimes.
Hey, I like you.
I got your flowers, let's get some coffee. Look deep in my eyes and tell me about your family. We can hold hands, then you can watch me shoot cocaine into my eyes and rock a memory. Let's steal some art tonight. What's a few Picassos when you're on a sexy date heist? Let's steal some precious fucking art tonight. Young and alive. And cross some state lines.
Or, you know, we could go a little more traditional. Go for a walk, watch a movie. Actually, there's a really nice flower exhibit at the Botanical Gardens. Ninja Brian was just telling me about that last week. He loved it. Wait, you know what? Fuck it!
Let's kill some guy tonight. We're holding hands and laughing while we shank 'em in the starlight. Let's take a motherfucking life tonight. We're young and alive. Which I can see for that guy. Yeah. Let's kill 5 guys tonight. Then share a cherry cola while we blast a savage drive-by. Let's kill 10 guys tonight.
You know what? First date, let's pump the brakes on the murders.
Let's kill 5 guys tonight. I'll take you back to your place and we'll craft a perfect alibi. Man, we had fun tonight. We're young and alive. And you can call me anytime.
Good first date. Want to do it again next week? No? Oh, all right.
Are are we live? Yes, so we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an exciting Friday stream where today we're doing something a little unique for me. Given I had recently completed a horror game I'd been planning to play for a little bit in just one stream, and that I had, in my own time now, beaten the Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree, I got in my head the idea of, for the first time, doing something like a bit of a tier list reaction to some shit. So today, I'm gonna be taking a look at doing a extremely subjective tier list of all of the bosses and a few of the field bosses for the Shadow of the Erd Tree DLC. Now, this is not going to be something about hard or not hard, just fully my vibe with these, which means it's going to be a combination of both the mechanics and the aesthetics of everything. So get excited for this, especially because I know for a fact several of my opinions do not match up with what I've seen the majority of people saying. So it is likely going to be very, very interesting collection of hot takes here. Romina Best Girl, 100% Lord Zelix. But we're gonna have to wait. I'm making sure she's closer to the end for when we get through this list. But, before we get into all of that, I have a simple question for all of y'all. How have your weeks been? How are your weekends shaping up to be? And most importantly, how are you all doing? I do pretty good myself. Recently, something happened that I decided to engage with, though I'm not actually super expectant on what's going to happen there. You see, just recently, I think it's V Shoujo, right? V Shoujo ended up putting out new open audition stuff, and someone in the Discord asked if I was going to apply for it. So I decided to go ahead, move on over, look at their application process, and just sort of get through it and knock it on out. So I've now officially applied to V Shoujo. And a part of that was they said I needed to upload a video where I explain who I am, and it couldn't be longer than 2 minutes. So I ended up in my own Eric Sweep. Absolutely. God, I can't even imagine getting an email back from them saying you've moved on to round 2. If that fucking happens, y'all, if I even move on from like the intro round of this shit, I don't know what's actually going to happen from that stage. I'm pretty good at protecting myself from over eager expectations, but I don't know. It's been a long time since I've applied to anything. So we'll have to see if I end up going insane at that point. But part of it was I had to make a 2-minute video, or like a 2-minute limit video about who I am. So I sat down, I did some basic video editing, and I made a little like trailer video of myself. It was about a 2-minute video. And I felt pretty happy with it. Hello? God damn it! God fucking scuffing damn it! 1 second. Alright, what happened? Which one of you broke? I know one of you broke. Ah! It was the phone! Alright, 1 minute. Give me 1 minute. Yeah. 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 Got it. All right, there we go. I ended up sending it off to a friend of mine who actually does like trailers and advertising video editing. He took one look at it and is like, hey, do you want me to just kind of edit this a little bit for you? I'm like, yeah, sure, what up? And he's like, well, I just think, I could probably scrape about 30 minutes off of this and add some music onto it so it keeps the energy up. I'm like, sure, hell yeah. So he ended up sending me back after doing a bit of light edit work on it, and I attached that and sent that as my my little video intro to me. And now I've been sharing it around because I'm very happy with it. And before we got into the tier list shit, I just wanted to share with y'all my video application, I guess, to VShojo. But really, it's just one of those like little VTuber trailers more than anything. I'll shut up. Here we go. Aaron, yes, that one. And I'm a pudgy little tardigrade who likes to play video games. I've been streaming on Twitch for 3 years now, and in that time, I've gotten myself into a lot of shit. Ah! God! Behind me! Shit! That's the assault rifle overheat. Sniper rifle? Okay. Yep, fine. I don't know if meleeing Saren actually does damage. I've gotten myself into a lot of weird situations. You've shown some serious commitment and caught me with my pants down. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in him.
It's
oh
okay,
god,
it's okay,
he's coiled around me. I can't believe it. I've been whale cummed. We're dealing with insanity and flesh mounds. It's been a time. What Try doing?
Oh, nothing. She's being a nuisance.
Does someone
She's
just pull the power
nuisance.
generator?
No.
I've even tried my hand at ASMR. That's right, puppy. I'm a demon. I just want to see what stupid idea I get next. Would you sell a milk blade dildo?
Yes. Me and my homie getting our cocks.
Yeah,
printed
and that's what
together.
we'll call it. We'll call it the me and my homie dildo.
Me and my homie.
Yeah, so that's that. That's a little trailer thing. We'll see what happens with that. My bet is I don't even make it out of round 1 of the VShojo application process. But don't worry. If it happens, I won't be able to control myself, and you will all know immediately. There'll be like a snip of the email, and one of you will likely say, hey, Eric, at the end of the email it said, please don't share this publicly. And I'll be like, ah, fuck. It's not a bad summary. Yeah. No, I was real proud because my friend ended up saying, yeah, I want to do some like pacing edit on that trailer thing you made, but I think you got a really good selection of clips there. Now, I was digging around for a bit. My dumbass tried to download videos that I had on YouTube using YouTube's download feature, not realizing it just stores it locally on YouTube. So I had to set up OBS to record my second monitor where I would full screen a YouTube video to save a short clip of an upload from a while ago. It was very scuff. It was very cringe, and like I'm sure there's probably a better way to do it, but I don't know. It seemed to, it all looked fine when it came out. Oh my god, but I was losing my shit when I was looking at the clips of like the old PNG me, especially the one where I'm dressed up as the succubus for the Mass Effect stream. Oh man, that was wild. Oh, and then a few of those, I think I just went through Twitch to look at what some of my most viewed clips that y'all have made of me were. And because one of you is cringe, the fucking whale cum one is of course somewhere near the top of my list of clips. And I'm like, fine, I know that guy really loves it, so I'll include it in my little trailer. That kind of results in what we got now. What? Yeah, no, YouTube doesn't have like a local way, even if you're the one who uploaded a video, to like download an MOV or MKV file of it. Like there are like third-party things you can do to try to download it, but at that point, you know, you're already going to be dealing with like some serious fucking like issues with it going between different party sources. And so yeah, I just recorded it on a separate screen directly out of the YouTube player. And I think it came out just fine. It's fine. It's everything's fine. But yeah. No, I just wanted to share that with all of y'all and let you know that yes, you can peer pressure me into applying to things like V Shoujo. Though I think I did humiliate myself then later, because after admitting that I did it, a bunch of y'all in the Discord started talking about all the different VTuber fucking agencies, and I had to show my whole ass about the fact that I don't know anything about the VTuber professional community because I only engage with indie streamers at all. Like, Judy's the most professional person in the streaming space I know, and she's like the epitome of the indie VTuber. And then everyone else I know of are just people I hung out with in different communities who are all fucking, like, hobbyists or small timers like myself. And it's just the funniest thing. Oh, God. No, alright. Alright. I suppose it is time for me to shift gears and to actually get into my Elden Ring boss tier list. To catch all of y'all up on my credentials and the position I'm coming here from. I hopped into the DLC on my New Game Plus character. Basically, the character I got my first win in Elden Ring in. So it was just New Game Plus, not like plus 2, 3, what the fuck ever, you know? So I came in with essentially a full late game build that I had beaten the game with. For me, that was, let's see here, claws, relatively heavy armor, but basically just claws and armor. I had the Bloodhound Step on initially, but I ended up swapping it around on a few different bosses. But it was between Bloodhound Step and an Ash of War I found in the DLC that was called The Poison Flower Blooms Twice. But essentially, what I'm coming at here is I got through the entire DLC and my New Game Plus run without summoning and only using claw weapons with no ranged Ashes of War, no spells, no incantations, nothing like that. The only Ash of War I used was either Bloodhound Step or the Poison Flower Blooms Twice, which is one where you jump and then kick directly at the enemy. And I ended up beating the whole DLC and going out and getting a quick Elden Lord ending. But just sort of the playthrough I had of the game then essentially was a relatively short-ranged melee weapon equipped in both hands, no casting of any kind, really, and made it through with no summons at all. The reason I really want to bring up all of this is partially to brag. Listen, I was challenging myself for New Game Plus. I wanted to see if I could actually beat the game without summoning any type of help at all. And the fact that I was able to pull that off makes me infinitely happy. Secondly, I need to be very clear that I didn't have any form of range, either like spellcasting incantations or even a long weapon, because this will come up on some of my boss rankings, particularly ones that I know that are going to be relatively hot takes. Because I made use of only the claw weapons, I was almost always having to play essentially body to body with the enemy. And that leads to, I think, a very specific playstyle, engagement, and issues with certain bosses and not with others. But hopefully that's enough preamble to make it very clear what my biases are going to lean towards, what my playstyle was, and how that's likely to flavor some of my opinions. So let's hop into the tier list. And we're going to be going just down the list. I did some reorganizing. I added in a few boys myself. Some of the fights, I added in a second one to be a phase 1 versus phase 2. Just because some characters are different enough between their phases, or I felt their phases deserved their own ranking, essentially, that I had to split things up. But let's go ahead and get started with first, the Furnace Golem. Now, the Furnace Golem is interesting, and I probably should have added a second one because there are 2 types of Furnace Golems in the game. There's the kind that you attack the legs, and there's the kind you have to throw a pot into their head in order to damage them. And what I'm going to say is no matter what, the highest ranking these Furnace Golems can get is going to be a C. Now, the reason for this is, for the very first time you fight a Furnace Golem, if you've figured out kind of the jumping pattern you need to do to avoid getting hit, this fight is a slog. In order to kill the Furnace Golems, really in order to put any damage into them, you need to break their stance 3 times, which is attacking one of their legs quite a bit, a shocking amount, honestly, until you get a break on it 3 different times, which causes them to collapse. Then you can get a critical off on them. And the experience I had was on every Furnace Golem required about 2 critical hits in order to kill them. What this means is these fights were very, very long and generally didn't include a lot of variety. It was honestly pretty fun the very first time doing it, learning the pattern, mastering it, and being able to prove I could do it over and over and over again consistently on one boss was pretty good. Additionally, the Furnace Golems are fucking beautiful aesthetically. The more you look at them, the more shit you're able to discover about them, to notice about them. The looks of them are amazing, but because of how long and dull and repetitive their fight is after the first time, I ended up only hunting down more of them towards the end because I just wanted to collect everything. And even with my completionist mindset, I ended up not bothering with the second Furnace Golem that you could only kill with throwing pots in their head, because honestly, I couldn't be bothered. The fact that they are so good looking and are interesting once, I think will keep them out of F. But the fact that literally the thought of fighting the last one drove me to skip them means I gotta drop these boys down into E. It's an interesting fight once, but with the amount of times you'll basically have to do this, these guys sort of step all over themselves and end up ruining themselves to a certain degree. Let's see here. Black Knight Guru. All right. Heavy weapon, shield. This was the very first sort of mini boss enemy I ended up beating in the game. I ended up going straight for the church right after I got into the DLC zone. Ran into one of these dudes who absolutely pancaked me. So I had to end up spending like 3 or 4 lives eventually learning this guy in order to beat him. Visually, these dudes are very interesting. Like as a first like mini boss encounter, they immediately grab your attention and make you kind of want to kick their ass with their stupid massive mace. But there's not a huge amount of interest to them. They're essentially just souped up soldier when it comes to like stat line stuff. And it's just a boy you've got to read and fight. I'm going to put them actually down into D for now, just to kind of give myself more room for things above. Because next up is the Black Knight Edred, who I'm immediately going to put above. So this is the dude that's got their own twin blade, and these guys are much more interesting to fight. honestly even a bit harder in my opinion. They're a lot more aggressive. They can cover a lot of ground, and they've got a few more really interesting moves that I liked encountering. I hated encountering these guys because it would always take me a couple of minutes to reacclimate to mini-boss styled combat. But I definitely like them a lot more than the heavy mace boys. Up next, Ancient Dragon Mane. This guy is interesting because he has two different fights. And I'm going to say I loved him visually, especially the first time you encounter him. This is one of the first transformations you're likely to encounter. I think it's one of only 2 transformations you can encounter. So he takes you very much off guard. And just seeing a fucking Dragon Man running at you the first time is both hilarious and off-putting. I didn't find his fight super interesting. His moves were pretty basic. I think he's just using a greatsword the entire time. It has one Ash of War on it that can sometimes make him do a couple of interesting moves. But ultimately, his initial encounter is a lot more interesting and kind of catching than any of his actual combat engaging with him. So I think I'm actually going to move him down. No, we're keep him at C. He passes, but just barely for me, essentially. The Black Jail Knight is a boy that I think is now absolutely infamous, and I did enjoy fighting him quite a bit. And for him, I made him my own little challenge mode. I was not allowed to use Skidoo blessings or use the Skidoo bark until I beat Black Jail Knight. That was the challenge I had set for myself. What the fuck is this? Hey, Lotus, I'm doing a tier list. I'm talking about who my favorite and least favorite fucking bosses in the Elden Ring DLC were. And how are you doing, Lotus? I'll warn you, I'm gonna have some hot takes. I'm sure even you will want to yell at me a little bit for some of these. However, Black Jail Knight, I think, has some really cool attacks. The problem I ran into him is he's just so tanky that he ends up being a dude with like just going claws, could never really stagger. So I had to approach him as a very, very slow fight. I did find him mechanically, I think of all of the summon fights, I think he was probably in the top 2, top 3 that you could encounter just for mechanically engaging, especially if you let him get off the machine gun once, is fucking hysterical. I just know I was personally frustrated with a lot of minor pieces of the fight with him, but I think I'm going to push him up into B. We can also start moving down these. The Dancer, I think I'm going to leave the Dancer below the Black Jail Knight. She was significantly easier of a fight. She has a lot more interesting to look at moveset, but ultimately her collection of abilities felt very much like characters we had faced before. And the only thing I ended up thinking about the entire time I was fighting her was just wondering if this is like the type of dancer Taith from the, or Tanith from the Volcano Manor was like. And while it's really cool to have a character that brings up some ideas of lore, I don't think it was quite enough for me to put her up with the Black Jail Knight. Now, the lore boy or the interesting fight boy I can put up with him is Red Bear, the Psychotic. Red Bear was it was very interesting. It was interesting to fight a dude who was running with a claw weapon and running bear incantations at the same time. Especially after killing him, you kind of get his equipment load, which really is what led me into fighting the actual big great bears to see if I could learn more about what was going on with them. So it's just kind of a much more interesting visual, I think, than any of the other characters, and a really cool lore set, and with some weird things you have to fight with. I'm going to put him with the Black Jail Knight. I feel like I enjoyed the mechanics of the Black Jail Knight a bit more, but I think Red Bear came out with the aesthetic and lore qualities of it. Then finally, we have Rakshasa, who I have to say the most interesting things about him are his equipment and what you have to do to encounter the fight. Ultimately, as a fight, visually, he's not any more interesting than his armor looks. Mechanically, his fight is very, very straightforward. And I don't know, I found myself, of all of them, being the most underwhelmed on an individual level with him. I found his equipment very interesting to get, but... Oh, wait, is Rakshasa she? I apologize if I got that wrong. But yeah, I'm going to put them down with the Night Guru. I feel like it's fine. There's nothing bad about the fight that would actually make me want to put it into E. But it's below where I would put basically all the other, like, jail summon fights. The Blood Chief. So encountering the Blood Fiends was very, very interesting. The problem I had is I think both of the Blood Chiefs you can find are leading, like, at least 5. There's, like, 5 Blood Fiends at the top of the temple. I think there's, like, 8 that are set up at, like, they're in the cave, in the blood pool area. Because of this, and because I'm using claws and not a lot of, like, AoE weapons, these fights end up feeling a lot more like a slog than anything super interesting for like, the way I end up fighting. And I'm having to do basically a dozen individual fights to get up to the Blood Fiend. I think their vibe, their hints at stuff that's going on with, like, the blood magic, the appearance of them, like, all the religious, and the introduction of their unique spells are all pretty interesting and cool. Yeah, no, so there's the 2 locations. There's the temple and then the... Wait, is there one where it's just the Blood Fiend? Or the Chief? I thought there was the one that's in the blood pool that's got, like, 8 minions with them, and there's the one by the temple that has, like, 5 minions with them. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, is that it ends up feeling a lot more like a slog than anything else for me. I like the vibe, I love the visual, the lore implications are very, very interesting, but just because I can never really fight the Blood Chief on their own and take in their fight, I don't know, it feels weird to put them anywhere above a D. Basically, I would need a lot more improvement. I think I would like to fight a boosted Blood Chief or like a Blood Chief duo without all the other Blood Fiends that generally come with them, just to actually get the full vibe of their magic and whatever's going on. Curse Blade Labyrinthi. So this is an interesting one. Oh, there is one that's a single fight. Oh. I don't think I fought that one then. Shoot. I'll leave it there for now then, but I might have to say I didn't actually fight them as a boss, if that's the case. Well then, for the Curse Blade, I'm very torn on how to rank the Curse Blade. Because if I was just ranking the Curse Blade about how I felt during their boss fight, I would end up putting them in E. Essentially a failing grade below, like, being good. However, if I was just to, like, go off my very first encounter with a Curse Blade, they would probably be up in C. When you first enter the DLC, it's very easy to accidentally pull aggro for a Curse Blade being your very first fight with anything in the DLC. And in fact, I did. And it was very cool to fight, like, you know, just a field Curse Blade being, like, the first dude to introduce me to, like, the difficulty, the aggression, everything. And I really enjoyed that fight. By the time I ended up getting to, like, the boss fight Curse Blade, I had already fought enough of these boys that I found myself more so annoyed with them than anything else. Their fight isn't super interesting. None of their abilities really come across as super crazy. And their visuals and lore implications feel very limited. especially in the instances of fighting this boss one, but I end up just not being super interested in them. I don't find them, though, as much of a slog as the furnace golems, and I would much rather fight one of these than a furnace golem, so I think I'm actually going to shift them up to a D. Death Knight version 1. Shit. Which one is version 1? Is that Twin Axe? Okay. Twin Axe Death Knight version 1 was honestly pretty fucking cool of a fight. I enjoyed this one very much. Immediately on getting into a fight with the Death Knights, I remember being reminded right away of the fights with the Colosseum bros, like the arena fighters. These guys' attack patterns are super, like, well telegraphed that they're attacking and what kind of attack they're doing, but still had enough flavor and interest around them that I ended up really enjoying getting into fights with both of them. Though I do find that the Twin Axe dude was a lot more interesting. So I'm actually going to rank both of them right now. And we're going to go right here. Ultimately, because we didn't get a lot of Godwin stuff going on, we don't really know much about the implication for them. And their fights were ultimately of the same sort of level as the Colosseum fighters or as like a summon fight. I'm not ever going to take either of these boys into an A tier, but I think they both solidly get themselves above the failing grades. And the Twin Axe one, with their variety of moves, I think puts them solidly in B, alongside Black Jail Knight and Red Bear. Demi-Human Queen Mariga. I feel so mean. I love the Demi-Human Queens visually, lore-wise, as a concept. I get on them and I kill them very quickly. Their spells are never super interesting. And it's almost more so just trying to clean up a slog of demi-humans to get to the queen to kill her as quick as possible. I love her. I want nothing about her to change. When thinking about all of the bosses in the DLC, we give her a D grade. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm glad you're here. You gotta learn some new, more interesting spells, though. Demi-Human Swordmaster Ons. Or as our group has come to call him, Yoda. A tier. A tier, and I need to explain what really put him into the A tier for me. So, I had gotten through this dungeon, and the whole time I had been hearing about Yoda from my friends that I was hanging out with in my Discord, and I kept wondering, what the fuck are these idiots talking about Yoda being an Elden Ring? I keep trying to imagine, I'm thinking of like some sort of frog-like a dude with like a glowing weapon. I was thinking of like the Briar Knights or something. I was thinking of just like some obnoxious character, like just like not a sword swinging Yoda, but you know, like a Yoda character who teaches you spells. And I get through a dungeon, I walk into a boss room, and I see a single demi-human who visually immediately reminds me of our fucking seamster guy. I don't remember the name of that demi-human now. Fuck, the demi-human who just wants to sew? 1 second. Demi-human sewer. Bach? Yeah, Bach! I'm like, and I see Bach walking at me alone in a fucking boss room. And the first thing that goes through my head is, oh, is this a joke fight like Patches? And I'm ready for something where I kill this like little lone demi-human and something else happens. Or right before I fight it, it explodes into a monster or something horrifying. Then he draws his sword, jumps across the arena, and hits me with a magic blade attack that nearly one-shots my ass. And I just immediately go, Oh. Yo. And I had to keep getting back into a fight with him until I won. This was someone I was so taken off guard. I loved the visual, loved the fucking story of him, and I really enjoyed the fight. This dude has a lot of really powerful and interesting moves, but also is very exploitable in certain ways. I was able to stagger this guy with my claws. It was the first, like, boss fight I had that I was able to get staggers off. So I knew I could stay really aggressive against him, which was really fun because he also has a very aggressive fighting style. So it led to the two of us just trying to tear into the other as aggressively as possible. And it was honestly a really enjoyable fight. Aesthetically, visually, mechanically, lore-wise, everything. I enjoyed it. It isn't quite S tier for me, but it was the first fight I remember enjoying every single element of and just having fun with. On to the Lamenter. This was another fight I was just annoyed with. This dude's gimmick in the fight is once you get him low enough, he starts summoning copies of himself. I think every time he does it, he summons like 8 or 9 copies, and you have to basically cut through them until you find the real boy and get back onto attacking him. At no point in the fight did I feel under any sort of a threat. I didn't feel like I needed to learn his attacks for any reason. It didn't feel like he was doing a lot of effects to me. And it just became a very annoying fight. I had to keep killing 9 of this guy to start to do damage to him again. I'm certain there's some people that have figured out some sort of trick to find the clone or something that made the mechanic a lot better to engage with. With my fight through him, I didn't find it mechanically interesting. Visually, it was really cool to encounter another transformation, but the amount of annoyance I ended up feeling with him just sort of didn't really draw me in at all. We've got Ghost Flame Dragon version 1 and version 2. Honestly, I'm probably going to blaze through these boys. I'm going to put them both in C tier. They're pretty average dragon fights. They keep themselves up. I would almost put them in D for just being dragon fights that we've done in the base game and not really anything interesting going on. But the inclusion of Ghost Flame and a few other elements on them, being able to be visually these undead creatures and where you end up encountering them, I think keeps them in sort of the average area, where I'm going to end up putting probably the dragon fights that are just base game dragon fight again lower than these boys. The Divine Beast Dancing Lion. This dude is very cool to look at. Visually, I very much enjoy him. And the mechanics of his phase 2, essentially, where he starts rotating through different elemental abilities, I very much like. And just going off of all that, I want to put him in tier B. However, I do have one major problem with the Divine Beast that's going to come up again on another boss I'm going to end up talking about. And that is the Divine Beast has no distinct limbs or weapons. And the problem with that is it becomes very annoying to try to read the difference between a movement on them versus an attack. There's a lot I really do like about them, but the fact that there are times when I'm having to get really close to do attacks, and then I can't tell if what they're doing is a movement or an attack, ends up being very, very annoying. So I'm going to push the Divine Beast Dancing Lion down into tier C. However, I have here a second one that goes into tier B. This one is the Divine Beast Deathblight version. This is a boy that you have to seek out yourself to fight and is very, very cool as a recurrence enemy. As the second one you can encounter, has a different phase from the Divine Beast, where the first phase they swap into, instead of being lightning or wind or ice, is Deathblight. Now, I would love to put this boy up into tier A, and it would be very easy for him to move there if they did more on the status effect versions, essentially. The second Divine Beast has the Deathblight element mode that it can go into, but it's the only status effect mode. After that, they just go back into lightning, wind, and ice. If this Divine Beast had been like Deathblight, poison, bleed, or Deathblight, poison, sleep, or some other combination of status effects, and that was just what this dude did, I think I would actually end up putting him into a tier A for being a really cool remix on the original Divine Beast and incorporating something that a lot of bosses don't do, which is like unleashing a torrent of different status effects onto you. But ultimately, with where they are, how they're working, and their one major problem being their no distinct attacks to look out for, I'm just going to have these two in B and C, respectively. Next on the list is Rolana Twin Moon Knight. For me, I spent literally 6 hours of a day banging my head off of Rolana. I don't know how many lives I went through. I just know I spent basically a whole day fighting Rolana over and over and over again. And I remember over time my exclamations of "this is bullshit" slowly transitioning into me yelling "gotcha." Rolana did something really fucking cool and amazing mechanically for me, where this is a boss that I think absolutely exemplified learning the punishes felt amazing for me on Rolana. I remember the first time going in and facing one of her like infinite chain attack combos where she is just spinning and attacking in all directions and doing it rapidly, and me feeling like there is no way at all to get damage in on her. Even if I roll, I'll get hit. Until eventually figuring out how to fully dodge one of those attacks and being able to actually like directly punish her for doing it felt absolutely amazing. And then we go into phase 2, where the visuals really unlock and she goes wild, and I have to essentially relearn her a second time. For me, Rolana is definitely going to be at lowest a tier A fight. I sunk the most time, I think, of almost any boss into her, and I enjoyed overcoming her. This was the first boss, I think, of the DLC that let me go through the full route of frustration into exhilaration, where I absolutely fell in love with beating her. I feel like visually there's a lot more that could have been done with her. Her phase 1 is obviously very, very dull visually. She's essentially just a knight with 2 swords. Phase 2 gets a lot more interesting visually, but there's some element could be improved, I think, for the visuals and the lores. Mechanically, though, this was definitely within my top 2, top 3 fights. So the lowest I'm going to put her is A. Hippo phase 1 goes into F. I'm sorry. Big animal coming at me was interesting during the cutscene. Not so much really if you're coming back and fighting him again and again. The hippo suffers the most from the Divine Beast problem of having no distinct limbs or weapons. Means every movement and attack looks very, very similar. especially if you're going with a very close range weapon. And you're having to be locked on and pressed right up against the side of its face to really be attacking. And the hippo has a major problem with one of its forward attacks. It has an attack where it opens its mouth and does a bite either to the left or to the right. However, dodging to the left or the right has no effect on being able to avoid this attack. If you are anywhere near either side of its head when it does a directional bite attack, you will be hit by it. You will be hit by the hitbox of this thing's head, no matter if you are trying to dodge away from the direction an attack is coming for. In fact, I think recently a patch came out for Elden Ring where they were reducing the hitbox of this hippo's head. When I had gotten through it, it was still pre-patched, and it was an annoyance. I found myself being very, very annoyed by the phase 1 of the golden hippo fight, and at no point did I find myself enjoying it or feeling like the visuals or the lore of it was very interesting. Which is interesting how much better I end up enjoying the golden hippo fight phase 2. In phase 2, the hippo gets quills and starts throwing in some ranged attacks, some spinning attacks, big other things making use of these quills. And there was something about having this distinct weapon and the attacks that the hippo started to use that had a lot more visual difference between them, that I suddenly felt like I could actually read some of these attacks and kind of figure out what's going on and where the hitboxes are. The golden hippo also looks a lot more interesting. It looks a lot more like an amalgam, a chimera, once it gets the quills on it, than when it's just sort of a hippo rhino. And I ended up enjoying phase 2 aggressively more than phase 1. Jagged Peak Drakes, I'm actually going to put down into E. Now, if the Jagged Peak Drakes were just dragons you were fighting, then I would put it in D as just generic reprint of Elden Ring base game boss fight. But they had two major problems I encountered. The first one is in the first arena that you fight a drake in the Dragon Peaks, is this bowl surrounded by these upshoots of jagged mountains and pillars and archways. And my dragon jumped onto one of these when it was below a quarter health the first time I was fighting it, in such a way that I couldn't get to it. I physically couldn't get to it. It physically couldn't be triggered to jump down from there. I was soft locked from being able to fight it and had to restart the entire fight because of it. And secondly, if you keep going down the Jagged Peak path, you eventually encounter a duo fight where there's two dragons fighting each other. I got so hyped at the idea of going in and killing both dragons that that's what I did. And one of the dragons gives you literally nothing for your efforts. No runes, no item drops, nothing at all. You only get items for the dragon that was winning the fight at the beginning. And that was very frustrating to discover and annoying. Ancient Dragon CX, I'm also putting in E. I'm sorry. Listen, when you're working with short-ranged weapons, the Ancient Dragons are fucking annoying. Unlike the basic dragons, they no longer have supportive lock-ons in the same way that the default dragons do. And the Ancient Dragons end up doing a lot more attacks that keep them out of range of being able to be punished by something like a dagger or the claws, and they end up just being an annoying fight. So much so that as soon as Senesax came in, I literally ran past her. I wasn't dealing with another Ancient Dragon fight. She gets to live in my game. I'm not dealing with it. Not at all. Didn't care. Wasn't interested. Super annoyed by these. As a claw user, I have no interest in fighting them at all. In fact, I've talked myself into putting her down. She's an F. I'm sorry. I hate those fights. Bale the Dread. Now, Bale the Dread, I think, is going to be my first very controversial opinion. As I had a lot of issues with the Bale fight. As already mentioned, I get frustrated with the Ancient Dragons. As with Claws, they don't have the same lock-on support as base dragons do. Default dragons, you can lock onto their head, any of their legs, and their wings, I believe. And this allows you to do a lot of different hits, no matter what type of attack they're doing. If they raise their head, you can normally still hit their legs. If they're only time they're fully out is when they're doing a fly attack, and you're not supposed to be able to punish those. Bale has a single lock-on point being Bale's head. And I think I know why. Because if you, say as a claw or dagger wielder, go for his point of contact with the ground to make sure you're in range to attack him, that being his one existing leg or his tail, you don't get to see anything that's really going on. This was a similar problem I ended up having with the Rykard fight as a claw user, is that the way I fought it was I ran into the lava and I clawed at the snake's tummy until it died. There wasn't a lot of interesting things going on. Now, the Bale fight is a lot better than that, because he's able to do breath attacks, claw attacks, sweeps with his tails. There's a lot more I actually have to be engaged with and reading. But what I'm reading are very limited parts of his body, showing me what kind of attack he's going to do, or lighting effects that are happening that's letting me know he's about to do some sort of a breath attack. Ultimately, I didn't get to see a lot of the fight, and it felt really bad for me. The fight, whether it was stage 1 or stage 2, ultimately didn't support. It felt like close-ranged weapons. It felt like they really wanted you on his head, using a weapon, even just like a straight sword or larger, so that you could be striking at the head, dodging attacks, and seeing the whole body the whole time. And I think with claws, daggers, fist weapons, I don't know if there's ever a really great reason to be trying to go for the dragon's head when a lot of his attacks cause him to lift his head. Bonk with hammer, get stuns. Yeah, I think any of the weapons longer than claws or dagger are going to be a lot better fight, because I know a lot of people rank the Bale fight very highly and talk about the visuals or this being the peak of dragon fights. I prefer default dragon fights, honestly. I didn't end up enjoying Bale's fight really at all, beyond listening to Egon the entire time. So I'm actually probably going to put the Bale fight in B for me. I didn't get to see it, ultimately. And most frustratingly of all, his tail isn't fully a hitbox. There were times where I was able to get behind Bale, run up to his tail while he's doing a breath attack, and lash out with my claws, and get off 6 attacks. All of which would go through his tail and apply no damage or on-hit effect at all, because portions of his tail do not have a hitbox applied to them. I don't know if this was an assumption that players could never get behind Bale. I don't know if this is a thing where his hitbox disappears or shifts while he's doing certain attacks. But ultimately, with the weapons I chose, the attack style I went for, the Bale fight felt buggy and uninteresting for large portions of it. The Falling Star Beast. Now, I'm going to start this boy off in E. This is just a repeat. Nothing really new or interesting ended up coming up with the Falling Star Beast. If you fought him in the base game, he's basically the same here. except where he's located, which I thought was really good and interesting. Where the Falling Star Beast is located is on the outskirts of one of the finger ruins, one of the large areas that looks like a massive crater. And as you go into sort of the finger lore, you get to learn essentially is a crater from outer space. And there was something about encountering one of these fuckers on the outskirts that was actually super interesting, like visually and lore-wise. Mechanically, I cannot really put him very high, just because he lives within the realm of, jagged dragons, ancient dragons, things just from the base game. But I think where they put him was perfect, and because of that, I'm gonna give him a D. Mater, Mother of Fingers. Visually and lore-wise, this is a great fight. This is the first boss I think I encountered that I went, what the fuck is that? Mater is, I think, an amazing Mother of Fingers style boss. There's just visually is perfect. All of the attacks look grotesque and unhinged. Mater? It's like Mater or Meter. It's essentially Old English for mother. So Mater. I think it's it's Mater or Mater. It might be Mater. I just know it's supposed to be Old English for mother. And she's beautiful and amazing and visually stunning. Her fight is ultimately mechanically not super interesting. There's nothing very wrong with it. In fact, she has a few really cool attacks, including when she goes UFO mode or whenever the lasers come out. But beyond those, the fight is pretty straightforward mechanically, and I didn't find myself really needing to do much beyond react simply to her attacks or movements. And I think really all of the interest in this fight came from the aesthetics and the lore implications behind her. Similar problem with Count Ymir, and I gotta put him even lower because Count Ymir just runs into, like, not being a very interesting mechanical fight. It's very cool to see some new spells coming out of a character, but it was very much just a meh sort of fight, essentially. A lot of interest in lore, visuals. I love his cloak. I'm so sad I didn't get his cloak after he becomes a finger maiden, I guess. But decent, okay fight, essentially. Jory, the Elder Inquisitor, is a weird one to rank, I think. Because Jory ends up becoming a bit of a gank fight where he starts summoning people. They're not super influential, though, and it's fucking hilarious the first time he summons one of the really big Inquisitors out of thin air. Additionally, I do love where Jory is, as Jory is using a weapon that'll immediately hint at some of the abilities and effects of the boss fight of this area. Essentially, if you see Jory as a very light intro to some of the effects that are going to happen in the Midra fight, he's very cool mechanically as a very, very light intro. After all, the weapon he uses, he's able to thrust and do some effects very similar to the sword that Midra wields. And that is interesting. However, it's very much defining him as his interest compared to how he sets up another character. Him individually, I think, is not the greatest, but is just interesting enough to, I think, eke him out to be. I'm going to say Jory is, no matter how this list ends up, the very bottom of B. He's essentially, for his positioning, his lore, and how he relates to another boss fight, ekes himself up just out of C. Which is where we come to Midra Phase 1. I loved the Vidra Phase 1. I found it fucking hilarious. And I think Midra Phase 1 and the cutscene that comes after it is the depths of your foolishness. It's very cool. Ultimately, I do think what's interesting is mechanically, I feel like Phase 1 almost actually comes very close to failing. Phase 1, if I'm being honest, and I'm just backing away from the funniness of it, mechanically almost drops itself as an F, actually. Because in Midra Phase 1, you walk into the room, it's great visuals just seeing this crouched down little man screaming at you. After everything you've come through, you're coming in ready for an epic boss fight, and you get that. And that visual is very cool. But then mechanically, it falls apart if you dodge his attempted grab. If you get hit by his grab, I think this is the perfect stage 1 for the Midra fight, and I would honestly almost want to make it an A. However, if you dodge his grab, like a friend of mine who was watching did, and run around the arena, Midra will chase you, trying to punch you the whole time. Which obviously isn't how you're supposed to approach the fight. This is like essentially doing something that the fight really isn't expecting you to do. But the fact that Midra is programmed to try and attack you physically with his hands and essentially is trying to punch you to death almost ruins what the Phase 1 of Midra is supposed to be. I would honestly be happier with Midra if he was programmed to only attempt to do his scream or his grab, or if after he missed, he didn't try to attack you. Honestly, what I would have loved is if Midra tried to grab you, and that didn't work. He tried to scream, and that didn't work. Then he would just start doing a very slow, constant AoE madness buildup. Something like he's muttering under his breath. Something just very only madness oriented, where it'll only damage and kill you if you don't do anything about it, but he's not actively trying to punch your lights out. Ultimately, I feel like if that had happened, I would put Midra up in an A Phase 1 as a A or S tier. But because I know for a fact he does just try to punch your lights out, it doesn't feel like it matches the character. It doesn't feel like it matches the actual vibe of what Midra Phase 1 is kind of doing. And more importantly, this is the first guy I'm really going to hold their arena against them, is that Midra Phase 1 exists in a large empty room, where what I would have loved is if Midra's room was decorated with dozens of paintings and murals and like wardrobes of what is it, Niala? Fuck, I have to look up Midra's wife's name. One second. Midra wife, Elden Ring? Nanaya, there it is. If there was a bunch of paintings and other things up that are of Nanaya, like this room is just filled with reminders for Midra about Nanaya, about his promise, about his love for her, I think that would be very cool, especially for what the effects of his transition into Phase 2 would be. So because of all of those shortcomings, I'm going to put Midra Phase 1 in Tier B. The initial effect, the grab, and sort of the weirdness of it are great. The cutscene is great. There's just a few of these things, like the fact he chases you, and that the room is, during Phase 1, fully empty, that push him down into Tier B for me. Well, I think Midra Phase 2 is my first S tier. The cutscene transition into the Midra the fucking frenzied flame lord was my favorite cutscene in the entire DLC. Like, literally my favorite one was watching Midra pull out the blade and transition into a Lord of Frenzied Flame. Additionally, mechanically, the fight with the Lord of Frenzied Flame is great, in my opinion. It's not overly complex, overly dynamic. All of the attacks are relatively strongly telegraphed, but also require understanding them to move around and dodge, especially once the fire starts being applied and he goes into phase like 2.5, I guess. I really love this visually. It made me infinitely curious about the lore, and I found this fight mechanically cool and interesting to engage with. I found myself really, really enjoying his fight. Lotus, did you not listen to what I was talking about? So there are two shortcomings for the phase 1. If these two shortcomings were fixed, I would have put him in S tier. It's the fact that he chases you around trying to punch you instead of staying committed to sort of his okay. Basically, I want him to try to grab you and then to just start doing a slow madness thing. The thought of Midra, everything we know about him and everything he's doing, running around and trying to punch you, feels so weirdly out of character. I understand they need him to do something in phase 1. I just wish he had started muttering to himself, and then you just have a slow madness buildup happening. So if you don't do anything about it, you'll die. But that he's not an actual physical threat to you, you know? And number 2, I just wish the room had been filled with just dozens of paintings of Nanaya, so that during his transition to phase 2, the Lord of Frenzied Flame, literally all of his attacks start burning and destroying all of the paintings and visuals and like saved wardrobe and tapestries of Nanaya, just to really like visually and room-wise hammer home this idea that this isn't Midra anymore, that he's not resisting, that it's like fully Lord of Frenzied Flame, you know? I feel like if those two things had happened, I'd have pushed him up into S tier. I just find the fact that he chases you around the room very weird with phase 1. And the room being an empty room he's in phase 1, both just kind of undercut how really hilarious and how good the initial shock of phase 1 is. It's still staying up in tier B for me, but it doesn't push itself into A or S tier because of those two shortcomings. Meanwhile, phase 2 is my first S tier fight. I love it mechanically, I love it visually. I don't know. The fact that the one weakness for phase 2 is that the room isn't filled with paintings of Nanaya for the Lord of Frenzied Flame to start burning away as he's attacking. I don't know. Do I have to drop him to 8? I don't think I have to. But I feel like if that had happened, this dude would be very hard to dethrone for me as being a very top tier fight. Next up, we got the Putrescent Knight. And I think I'm going to put the Putrescent Knight up into A tier. The Putrescent Knight is visually very interesting. There's not a ton to read from him. But I think I would put him visually definitely above phase 1 Renala. And I think even above phase 2 Renala. This skeleton boy riding a melting horse. This amalgamation of essentially a slime that has dedicated itself to Saint Trina. Lore and visual-wise is very interesting. And this is the first dude, I think, that has had an absolute 10 out of 10 arena. The vast, open, purple, watery, swampy cave that you had to infinite drop into, I think really does a lot to set this boy up. Mechanically, I enjoy the fight. It's not a complex fight. It could have probably been mechanically even more engaging, but it's mechanically straightforward enough that after you get used to the weird drag on the curved weapon for the Putrescent Knight, it becomes a fight that you can really run off of feel on and start to memorize the attack patterns and really start to feel like you're outsmarting this guy, essentially. Decent punish windows, nothing amazing. I wouldn't actually put him really equal to the full Rolana fight. I guess I would say if I'm like gonna put these in an order, I'd probably rank these in an order like this. You know, let's do a little reorganizing here as well. Yeah. One second. I'm actually going to go down the whole list and kind of get these reorganized. That looks about right. What do we got here? Yep, that looks right. Down here. All right, cool. Got them all ordered up now. So I was on the Putrescent Knight, and yeah, so I think visually, lore-wise, actually very interesting. Fight is very straightforward in a lot of ways, but it has a few interesting mix-ups in it that I ended up enjoying. The things that I think keep him out of S tier is while, like, as an idea, he's visually very interesting, as just a standing statue, he's not actually super visually interesting. It's essentially just a skeleton boy, which is something I've seen ultimately in a lot of games. So it's something that, like, I think in isolation is pretty cool, but just within, like, video game boss fight spheres, keeps him from being amazing. If there was a lot more melting and slime and body reforming and maybe, like, the lilies incorporated into the actual boss as body or weapon, I think I would enjoy him even more visually. But yeah. Let's see. We got our 2 rune bears. They're pretty tough, though, you know, essentially they're fights from the DLC. But I do rank both of these, I think, visually and lore-wise above the Jagged Peak dragons. And I enjoyed these fights, I think, more than the Blood Chief. Honestly, I think I'm going to put these 2 right below the Falling Star Beast. I think that's where I would put both of these. And I'm going to put Rayla above, was it Raglea? I'm going to put the wife above the husband. I ended up enjoying her fight a lot more, as it was, like, going on directly in a lake, I think. Whereas the husband is just sort of an open field fight. Deathrite Bird. Buff. I don't think I encountered this fucker, I'm gonna be honest. I don't remember encountering him at all. I don't think I was actively avoiding a Deathrite Bird, but I don't remember fighting it in the slightest. Guess we'll just kind of put him down generically with dragons we've fought before. Now we have the Sunken Tree Spirit. So this is an ulcerated tree spirit, something we fought several times in the base game. However, the Sunken Tree Spirit gets a lot more preamble. This is a boss you only encounter in the Sunken Chapel after you've basically gone through a whole puzzle sequence and drained it of water, and then suddenly emerges and fights you in a way that I think is very interesting. I think it was a really good reuse of a base game enemy. We're essentially unlocking an ancient, forgotten chapel, unlocked an enemy I remember from my past, essentially. So I think this was, without a doubt, the best reuse of a main game enemy type. And it felt a lot more interesting and horror-oriented than a lot of the other reused fights. I think visually and lore-wise, this one was basically the perfect reuse enemy. Mechanically, it's the ulcerated tree spirits. They're a pretty straightforward fight, not very hard. very reactive to reading, very slow compared to a lot of the DLC fights. Ultimately, I think I'm just going to leave it at the bottom of C. Basically, I think it was perfect positioning, perfect use of it for what it was. Because of that, I'm going to put it where it will, like, I'm going to put it right here at bottom of C. Ulcerated tree spirits are chumps. Yeah, I know. They're chumps. They're relatively easy fights. I think those are just the perfect use. In this DLC, I think the Sunken Tree Spirit was the absolute best reuse of a base game asset, essentially. And that's why I'm going to just put it above every other reuse enemy and just have it be my bottom of C tier, essentially. Tree Sentinels 2 buffed. I think these are the second best reuses. These guys, I actually got excited when I saw them because I got to now see what my end of the DLC build was like against the very first fucker I had to fight in the base game. I think I'm actually going to put this up with the fucking Sunken Tree Spirit just because of how it made me feel. These guys were very cool to encounter. There's two of them. It felt like a slog to get through both of them. There was some interesting lore stuff from them, but not a ton. Really, the good vibes from them was the fact that they were so late in the game, behind a secret area to get into, and that it felt like, okay, now I get to see how far I've come from the very first Tree Sentinel to the end of the DLC Tree Sentinel boys. Honestly, if these guys had been, like, for some reason up in a near a limb, it probably would have had a very similar effect on me. But I think where they were was a great use of them. But ultimately, they will never get above the bottom of C, because it was really just a reuse enemy, and they weren't really perfect where they were. If we had faced something that was almost like a proto-Tree Sentinel, like something that made them feel more ancient than the actual Tree Sentinel, I think I would have liked them even more. I would have put them above the Sunken Tree Spirit. But I think this was another very good use of a reuse enemy. Devonia, I'm going to put right below the Bale fight. Devonia is not a reuse enemy, but feels very much like it. Devonia was basically the first Crucible Knight. This is the one that has all of the Crucible Knight abilities, including some we've never seen before, like the flower attack, like turning half lizard centaur mode and coming after you. Ultimately, though, it's very mechanically similar to the other Crucible Knight fights. There's not a lot mechanically interesting going on. It's just the lore implications of her that are really neat and interesting, and her positioning, I think, is great. I enjoyed her fight a lot more than the Golden Hippo, but I'm going to put her basically top of D, essentially. She's going to be above almost any of the other reuses that didn't get used perfectly, but not particularly high. Commander Gaius. I think I put it bottom of B. Commander Gaius didn't feel ultimately like a super hard fight. What I've learned, though, is by using just claws and never rolling away from him, I might have busted his attack pattern, as basically I got into a fight where all he ever did was attack with his main weapon or use the boar attacks on me. He almost never used any spells or, like, gravity abilities at all. So as a fight, it was very much learn 5 or 6 attack patterns and get into it and tank his opening charge, essentially. I tried a few times fighting him with Torrent, and that always proved to be a dumb idea. Do not fight Commander Gaius with Torrent. He is faster than Torrent. He will one-shot Torrent. Don't bother doing it. I found him visually pretty interesting. There's something about having to fight on foot a giant fucking boar with a knight on its back. It reminded me a lot about the mounted dragon knights that I'm forgetting the name of. So there was some interesting things about the fight with him, especially learning how to deal with his flurry of attacks, where both him and the boar are attacking together. But it wasn't a super interesting or great fight. The visuals weren't amazing. The lore was very self-contained and didn't make me super curious about other things going on. So ultimately, I guess I'd say bottom of B. I definitely did like him more than the Divine Beast fight because it felt more like a fight with him. But I think just barely above that. The Skidoo Avatar was not a fight I enjoyed at all. My favorite parts of the Skidoo Tree Avatar fight was any time I was trying to run towards it to fight it. When the Skidoo Tree was throwing the massive wave of vines out at me, or doing its explosion, or doing its dash attack, I enjoyed the fight. As soon as I got up to it, and had to go up to its stalk and just attack its stalk for 10 minutes until it died, I didn't really enjoy the fight at all. It was a lot of trying to use some info to figure out if it was doing the thorn attacks. Otherwise, by being so close and up against it, most of its other attacks wouldn't hit me. Unless it was the one where it punched straight down and summoned thorns. And the fact that I had to fight it 3 fucking times ended up just annoying me, honestly. For anybody who hasn't beat the Skidoo Tree, important note, after you beat it, it falls over and you can go and critical its dead body to make the next stage have less HP. Once I figured that out, the fight got a lot easier for me. Something to keep in mind. But ultimately, this is a boss that feels like just happens 3 times and ends up being annoying. But I do think it did better than a lot of these. I think I would end up ranking it. There were parts of the fight I definitely enjoyed more than the Divine Beast. At least the one that didn't have the interesting Deathblight phase. But I ended up not super enjoying it most of the way through. Romania Saint of the Bud, I'm putting up an S tier, though I might talk myself into putting her into A tier. The reason is, of all of the fights, visually and lore-wise, Romina was my favorite fight. Going through the base game, going through the DLC, walking into a broken, ruined temple, and suddenly feeling like someone turned saturation up to 100 was so fucking stunning and beautiful. And as I slowly realized the horrific insect monstrosity walking towards me was honestly a great moment for me. I find Romina's fight to not be mechanically super interesting. She's got a few cool attacks. Almost all of them, though, involve her doing, like, casting or magic. Like, whenever she's using her weapon art or her spell, anything involving the butterflies is always beautiful and cool and actually makes me thinking about spacing. Though a lot of her centipede and scorpion attacks feel very basic. There's nothing wrong, I feel, with her fight. Just ultimately nothing super interesting going on with the actual mechanics of the fight itself. But visually was definitely my favorite. There was a moment during a fight with her when I'm looking at these butterflies, and later on I read the description for the butterfly spell, where it talks about how the butterflies had felt abandoned by the god of rot, essentially. And Romina offered them a home. That I remember just this thought in my head coming out that is now my official headcanon, where I thought, I bet Romina would be offended by Melania, Blade of Mikola. There's something about Romina that just gives this weird vibe that there's a side to the entire Rot lore that we haven't been exposed to, essentially. Where Kaled and Melania give this impression of Rot being solely bad, solely grimy, solely destructive and vile. And Romina being essentially this whole Rot begets new life that can spring forward and that can be precious and beautiful. Romina gave me the strongest vibe check, essentially. This was the first, like, boss that I ended up... And I did not fight these bosses in a reasonable order, I'll say. That fully made me question something I thought was true about the base game. And it was fully just this color, the vibes, the butterflies. This boss, lore and visual, fucking won me over. Even though mechanically, I'm going to say mechanically, almost every boss, A tier and up, I think was better than Romina. The visuals and lore for Romina felt so good that I have to put her in S tier. Let's see here. Mesmer the Impaler Phase 1 is at minimum gonna be A tier. This boy, I think, visually, his Phase 1 is pretty initially striking, though I think doesn't quite have the same level of shock or interest, or like, it doesn't give me the same hard impact as like the demi-human Midra Romina Putrescent Knight. To be fair, this could be entirely because of him being the poster child. I've gotten a lot more used to his base look, and have gotten some exposure to a little bit of his lore beforehand, so I was able to get a little desensitized him. Unfair disadvantage to Phase 1 Mesmer there. However, mechanically, I found Mesmer to be an amazing fight. I still think I enjoyed Rolana more, but Mesmer's Phase 1 was mechanically beautiful. It was amazing to be slaughtered by his long string of attacks 3 times, then to figure out how easy it was to actually fully dodge his big sweep into the triple stab, into the ground stab, into the impaler ground explosion. Once I figured out how to do all of that in 3 very simple dodges, it felt really good. Mesmer Phase 1 is amazing on its own right, and I love it for how well it trains and preps you for Phase 2. And I'm going to put, I think, Mesmer Phase 2 up as another S tier for me. Mesmer Phase 2 brings a ton of lore, a ton of visual change and interest going on. And Mesmer's Phase 2 to me felt like the perfect Phase 2 coming off of his Phase 1. Because after I had learned Phase 1, after I had died like 10, 20 times to Mesmer Phase 1, I only died a couple of times to Mesmer Phase 2 because it felt like Phase 1 had perfectly trained me for what Phase 2 would be like. And the only fully new things, which were his snake attacks, were so big and like predictable in what kind of things they would do and so well telegraphed that Phase 2 felt like the most fair upgrade to a Phase 1 I think that exists in this game. That I absolutely loved Phase 2 mechanically, and it had strong visuals and lore shit going on. Including his last line, which I just gotta talk about. So when you kill Mesmer, at the end, he says something that I've only heard one interpretation come out of, and I want to share a second interpretation. When you drop him, he goes, Mother, America, a curse upon you. It's like a curse upon you or a curse upon thee. I don't remember the you or the differential there. I'm going to guess thee because he speaks very old Englishy, you know, a bunch of these and eths and whatnot, what have you. Almost everyone who's interpreted it has said this was Mesmer finally realizing that America has abandoned him, which is why he goes, Mother, America, a curse upon you, and finally just says, fuck you, Mom, I don't respect you anymore. I have a slightly different interpretation, though, personally. One that I don't necessarily think is right. If I was to actually put money down, I would stick with the default interpretation of this final line. Me, though, I do want to throw out another possibility I think that could be very, very interesting. We know he's broken the seal that his mother gave him, and that the abyssal serpent is now more so coming out, having greater influence. He's essentially rapidly transforming or picking up time to become the embodiment of the abyssal serpent that's inside him. So, one additional interpretation we can have is that him saying mother... Yeah, but the second phase of that fight was easier than the first. Was it easier than the first? Or once you've beaten the first, you're fully prepped for the second? I feel like I'm putting up phase 2 as S tier because I feel like it was the perfect phase 2 off of the phase 1. I felt like I just now knew all of the moves, and the moves I didn't know were so well telegraphed that I could solve them relatively easily. I died less to phase 2 than I did to phase 1, but to me it felt like because I knew all of the moves, because of how long I had spent fighting phase 1. Wait. But another interpretation I have is that him saying mother, yeah, it was a lot better telegraphed. I agree, a lot better telegraphed. Which is why I found it a really good additional move to him to have that we didn't get used to in phase 1, was it was very well telegraphed, so I knew what to do. Is that him saying mother was still him, but that when the voice that comes out is America, might be the abyssal serpent at that point. Because it's not just Mesmer that's dying, it's the abyssal serpent that's dying as well. And I'm wondering if what's happening here is either Mesmer or the abyssal serpent actually repeating something that they had heard or that they believe or that they hold on to as like a fact. Or instead of saying, I, Mesmer, want to say fuck you, Mom, and more so Mesmer at the end of his life, or the abyssal serpent at the end of their life, expressing something that was expressed at the beginning of their life. Something that America might have heard, or that Mesmer might have heard when the abyssal serpent set root. Which is that Mesmer, or all of America's children, would be a curse upon her. Essentially a statement that all of them would be cursed. Now, the main reason, like I said, if I was to put money down, I would also go with the interpretation that this is just Mesmer finally saying, fuck you, Mom. But the reason, yeah, like I said, I think that interpretation is probably more likely right, Little Pink. I think the acceptance that he's been abandoned is more likely. But the reason I'm thinking of this other interpretation as a very small possibility is because of another thing America is quoted as saying. One second. America quotes, you demigods become what you will? 1 second. Okay. Let's hear it. In America's own words, hear me, demigods, my children beloved. Make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it Lord, be it a god. But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices. The reason I bring up this quote from America, is up until now, with the context we've sort of had until this point, this has always been seen as a sign of America being an evil and horrible mother, of her fragmenting the Elden Ring apart and telling her kids, now become God or Lord, or else, in my eyes, you're nothing. You are sacrifices. But after the end of the DLC, I'm wondering if this is a warning. I'm wondering, since America went through the full process to become a god via the divine gate, and we now know all of the steps that Mikola went through to try and become a god, and what they involved. They literally involved Mo becoming a sacrifice. Radon, in a way, both becoming a lord and becoming a sacrifice. Mesmer became a sacrifice. It's a warning that you better become a lord or a god. Yeah, but I feel like the main interpretation that had happened up to this point was this was Marika being uncaring. I wonder if this is Marika being essentially prophetic. Whether it was a prophecy that was given to her, or just she knows what will happen. This is her warning her kids that in the pursuit of godhood, they would all end up being sacrificed in one way or another. Because that does happen. And even the only demigod that does become a lord is functionally sacrificed as well. She's warning her kids about you, the player, or is she warning her kids about her kids? Because Mikola ends up doing quite a lot to a lot of her kids as well. If we want to kind of run down the full list, he sacrifices Melania in an attempt to sacrifice Radon. He also sacrifices Mo. He works his way through a good half of his siblings, including himself, if you want to think about it, in his pursuits. It's, I don't know. It's something where I'm curious to what level of a warning she's giving, you know? Hutu doesn't matter. She's saying that this is the way it will end. Yeah. Alright. Now we get to move on to our last two boss fights that we will be ranking today. Consort Phase 1 and Radon Consort of Mikola. Now, I'm gonna be honest. I really enjoyed the Phase 1 fight. Like, I really enjoyed it. There was something shocking about seeing Radon, even though I knew who the final boss was going to be at that time, because I'd done the full Ansbach quest. There was something very shocking about seeing him that was really cool, and I mechanically loved the Phase 1 fight. I'm sorry, I loved it. It took me forever. It took me like 2 hours a day for a full week of fighting this guy to finally, in my head, figure out Phase 1. And as I did it, Phase 1 transitioned from being this whole fight is bullshit into really seeing where the punishes, openings, and things I can do are, to the point that, honestly, I kind of want to put him even above Rolana. I fell in love phase 1 fucking consort fight, and I wish more of his pool was tied to it. I wish I had to get through more of his HP before he moved on to phase 2, because I fell in love with it. There's only one attack in his phase 1 I end up literally hating, and it's an attack that I had to look up how other people were doing no hit on it, because I couldn't figure it out, and it's where he does a quick left-right opening and then swings together. Because it is literally timed that if you roll the first swing, you'll get hit by the second swing, then you can roll the third, like, lunge swing. But if you get hit by the first swing, you can roll the second and third swing without a problem. It turns out if you put on the backstep talisman, you can backstep the first swing, then roll the second two, but there is no way to roll all three, even at like lightest equip load. So that's the one attack that pisses me off, and that it doesn't seem like there is a default mechanic way to avoid it. You have to engage with a little bit of fuckery to avoid it. That was the only attack that felt super unfair phase 1. Is it the pull? No, like, I hated the pull until I got down to always being able to dodge the pull. Then I didn't have any problems with it. If I got hit by the pull, I hated it. But as soon as I figured out how to roll it, I could fully fucking... Oh, wait, did medium and light have the same timing data? Then never mind then. Yeah, it sounds like there's no default mechanics way to avoid the attack I'm talking about, which feels a little bullshit. But to be fair, I think it's one of his lightest damage singular swings. So it feels like it's something where it's very easy to eat the damage on it. It's just upsetting, but there's no kind of default mechanic way to actually fully dodge it. But still, phase 1 Radon, I end up just kind of loving, as it actually feels like I'm mastering his attacks and getting through all of them. Radon, consort of Mikola. Has a lot of problems I would like to talk about. But let's start on the positive side. For a phase 2, he is predominantly a lot like Mesmer's phase 2. A majority of his attacks feel like you were prepped for by getting through phase 1. He does a lot of his baseline phase 1 attacks. So if you've solved phase 1, you can approach 70% of phase 2 in a similar fashion. In phase 2, he also unlocks basically follow-up light beams, and these are good on the phase 1 attacks, in my opinion, as essentially they narrow your windows and where you can move, so that you have to be even more precise and accurate with your dodging. But if you master the dodges from phase 1, and you figure out what you have to do position-wise to not be punished in phase 2, it feels like simply upping the ante on the phase 1 for about 70%. For all of his new phase 2 attacks, almost all of them feel like bullshit. He has his light speed dash, he has his double sweep, and he has his 5 overheads that all feel obnoxious, no matter how used to them you get. All of these attacks annoyed and confused me coming off of phase 1, and unlike Mesmer's phase 2, they did not feel straightforward enough or telegraphed enough to know what to do against them. And that ended up being really, really frustrating. Also, the massive AoE explosion is something you just have to run away from, which I understand, It just didn't feel good. I think the good version of this is when you get Radahn low enough, he suddenly glows bright and jumps into the air. And immediately, because you had to beat default Radahn to get here, you know exactly what he's going to do. And he's going to do an empowered version of the Comet Strike, which is where you run. You start running, and it's the one time running for it feels good, because I think it was the perfect time to be like, wait, I know this attack from the first time I fought Radahn. Fucking hell, I gotta get out of here. That felt like a good use of an arena explosion that you just have to run away from. His Godly Light one doesn't feel as good, especially as his Godly Light one doesn't give you a huge warning. And if you were doing anything, dodge rolling, jumping, backstepping, drinking a potion, doing a buff, as the ability starts, you do not have enough time to run out of it. You need to have been sprinting when the ability starts and to sprint in a straight line in order to escape it. The Comet is slightly more forgiving, and more importantly, is immediately an attack we recognize as coming from Radahn. I think the grab is good. In my opinion, I love the grab. Honestly, I would have been okay with Radahn's grab being a one-shot. I feel like they were really nice to make Radahn's grab a two-shot requirement. I feel like that was very nice of them. To be fair, I was running, I think, through the game at like 40 vigor for my late game. So like the very bottom of the soft cap there. And I just interpreted a boss getting a grab off me as me dying. If Mesmer got me with his grab, I died. That was just what happened. And I accepted that. Grabs are generally very telegraphed. You might fuck up the timing on them the first couple of times. But I feel like once you understand a grab, you're not generally grabbed by it. I find a grab being a one-shot to be fair enough in my mind. That's something that I fully accept. And I feel like they were very kind to let the grab be a two-shot on it. And to be fair, the only time I died to it was the time I let it happen so I could get the ending. You didn't mind the Ancient Dragon? I can understand that little thing. I think that specifically comes from the weapons I'm using being claws through the entire time. Close range weapons against Ancient Dragons feels like shit. Finally, the final thing I want to say about the consort fight. I think the thing that would have moved Phase 1 up into the S tier for me would have been if they had actually committed to what they said. When I had finished the Ansbach quest line, I got a visual in my head that I was very hyped for. And that was the visual of walking into an arena and seeing Mogwin wielding Radahn's twin swords walking at me. And Mogwin's extra wide omen body doing all of Radahn's attacks. I was so excited to receive the body of Mogwin performing with the soul of Radahn, but I was honestly a little sad to see it just was Radahn and they put some horns on his arm. I'm like, you cowards. Give me Mogwin. But yeah. So I think, yeah, I think this is where I'll stick with it. I found the F tier fights to be the Ancient Dragon's Senesax. It's a reuse of Ancient Dragon fights we got in the base games. And with Claws, I find the Ancient Dragon fights to be worse than the default Dragon fights. The lock-on is just a little more fucked than the default dragons, so they end up being very annoying for very short-range attacks. And Hippo Phase 1 felt horrible. with its having the classic problem of having no distinct limbs or weapons, it's hard to tell what's an attack versus what's a movement, though it felt a lot better once it had gotten its spines. Yeah, Little Pink. So I put Hippo Phase 1 down here, but honestly, Hippo Phase 2 went all the way up to D for me. It felt a lot better. It felt a lot better once it had distinct weapons it was using against me. For my top tier fights in A, we've got the Putrescent, Demi-Human Swordmaster, Mesmir, Rolana, and Phase 1 for Consort Radon. And in my S tier, I'm putting Mesmir 2, Midra Phase 2, and Romina, Saint of the Bud. Romina, though, being very, very carried by her visuals and lore stuff. I like Devonia. I can understand enjoying Devonia. I really liked her lores and visual, but she felt, even with the new attack she had, a little like a reuse enemy, so I couldn't rank her above C. And I felt like the reuse, like lore, visuals, and timing for the Sunken Tree Spirit and the Tree Sentinel duo was just a bit better for me. The Twin Sword Black Knight was hilarious. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot more. That's why I ended up ranking him so much higher than the Giant Mace Boy. So yeah, but these are mine. I think my most controversial things here are going to be how low I ranked Bale. And probably, I don't know. I can see where a lot of people won't end up liking the Romina fight. I don't think mechanically it's the strongest fight they have. But I don't know. The mechanics felt strong enough and the visuals were outstanding. Midra, I felt like slightly weaker visuals than Romina, but much stronger mechanics. And I felt still visually great, lore interesting. Bale got meme status with Egon. Egon is great. I do love Egon fucking screaming at Bale. The fight feels very good with Egon, in my opinion. What I'd say is, what weapon are you using, Little Pink? Because I'm going to take a guess. You're using a weapon that lets you hit Bale's head. If you're using a weapon with the range that allows you to fight Bale face to face, I imagine it's a much better fight than I'm ranking it. With the claws, I have to be attacking his leg or his tail, so I'm almost never directly in front of Bale, so I don't get to see the fight. I used the Death Knight's Great Axe. Yeah, I imagine. Mostly hitting the tail. Did you have a problem with the tail? Because I found when I was going for the tail, huge areas of it didn't have a hitbox at all. And I ended up feeling like something on Bale didn't get tested. His fight felt a lot buggier than it should have been. I had a problem with the leg stump. Yeah, there were problems with his legs and tail where it felt like the hitbox just disappeared at times. And it felt like they really only intended you to attack his head, which I can understand. I think that probably makes the fight better. But with the range of my weapons, I ended up not being able to hit his head half the time, just from it being out of range of me. So I had to go for the legs and the tail, and I think that made the fight worse. I think that just means I didn't get to see all the cool stuff going on in the fight, and so it ended up feeling bad to me. But yeah, there you go, y'all. I'm gonna go ahead and download this then. And, Midra Phase 1, that's the crawling corpse part, right? Well, also you walking into the room and seeing it, you know? It's not just him crawling after you. I was very close to ranking it higher. I gave a reason for why I thought Midra was only the top of Phase B. If so, it's very thematic points, very. There were two elements I wish had changed about it that I think would have made it an S-tier fight to me. The first was the room needed to be decorated. I wanted the room to be filled with paintings and tapestries of Nananya, of his wife. That way when he went Phase 2, you could see the Lord of Frenzied Flame burning away all the beloved pictures, tapestries, and memories of her. And I wish he didn't run after you trying to punch you. I wish he had just descended into maddened murmurings that slowly caused your madness bar to fill up if you didn't do something about it. Yeah, no, I got you. Like, I understood the dungeons kind of vibe it was going for. It was just those two elements I wish had been different to give the phase one and the transition just more weight to them, you know? Like, if that room had the paintings and memories of his wife in it, to see him surrounded by them, keeping him enduring, and then to see when he transitions, him callously burning it all away. I think even though it'd be like, hey, why did the guys let him keep all these paintings? Might have been like a question there. I think for the vibe of the fight itself, would have been top tier to me. To be fair, the major fight was still pretty top tier to me. I just felt like that would have taken phase one up to S tier for me as well. But yeah, y'all, that is my personal, very biased ranking of all the bosses. For anyone who disagrees, remember I started off saying I only use claws throughout this. Did all the fights without summons, spells, or anything to give me any range. And I think doing that ruined the Hippo and the Bale fight to a great degree. I think, yeah, I'm going to say the dragons, the Hippo, all of these, I think to a degree, were relatively lowered by my choice of weapon and the way I had to engage with the fights. Did you know you could repost the Skadoo tree on every health check? I did eventually figure that out, and I did that on the round I ended up winning. It took me longer than I care to admit to learn that I could do that to the Skadoo tree. The Skadoo tree was another fight. I think that would have been ranked higher if I wasn't using claws and was using a weapon that would lead me to a lot more face-to-face hitting its head combat. Yeah, it's not super obvious. It's pretty obvious once you figure it out, of course, but that's how you do. But yeah, y'all, there we go. I'll save this and I'll post it on the Discord so all of y'all can yell at me about how dumb and stupid and bad at things I am. I'll appreciate that greatly. That sounds like quite a few of you are also big Romina fans, so I'm glad to hear that. Let me just, I'm gonna just take a sniff of it, honestly. All right, where's the Discord? Here we go. I'm objectively right. Fight me. All right. Gonna post that up, and hell, fuck it. I'll even pull up my Twitter and post this as a response to my going live announcement. I'm very middle of the road for Rolana. I fell in love with the Rolana fight mechanically because it took me 6 hours to beat her. I'm sorry. The fact that at the beginning of me fighting her, I felt like her attacks were fully bullshit, unfair, impossible to dodge, and by the end, I could essentially no-hit her phase one and punish almost every one of her attack patterns. That transition felt amazing to me. And going into phase two, like, because I have to play really close to her, I am constantly having to go in close, deal damage, trigger her to be doing fire attacks, and just desperately trying to create just enough distance that she'll remain fire mode and not go into her beams of magic. It felt like I was actually having to learn how to fight her to really get through it. Once again, it took me only 4 tries. Hey, that's fair. It took me like 3 tries to beat Gaius. And from what I've heard, people had a lot of trouble with Gaius, and I didn't understand it till I looked up other people's fights and learned that by sticking right up against him the whole time, I never had to deal with any of his spells. So I just had to learn his basic attack and his boar's basic attacks, and then I could just fucking dumpster his ass. It was very funny to learn how many people had trouble with Gaius. Essentially, I think I rolled my so I think all of y'all know about the Dark Souls boss RNG rolls, right? Where the game will arbitrarily pick 3 bosses that they will just make impossible for you, and 3 bosses that you will breeze through. Gaius, I definitely rolled the 0 problems whatsoever with RNG. And Rolana, I think I rolled the absolute struggled forever against. But I ended up falling in love with Rolana's fight mechanically, so much so that I can't put her below A. She's right next to Phase 1 Consort Radon for me. His spells weren't bad, but he charged around a lot. I don't know. I only had to deal with him charging into the fight, and I could tank that charge. And then if I just stuck next to him and ran as soon as he created any distance, like, I just made sure I was never far away from him. But, like, I was in melee range of him the entire fight, so he never went into a second charge, I guess, is essentially where I was on my fight with him. I only had to deal with him charging at me the first time, and he never charged again after it. Oh, good. You put the big bud. Yeah, Romina of the Bud. Honestly, her mechanics, I think, are very simple and aren't that great. But visually and lore-wise, I think she was the peak of the DLC for me. She was... Well, her being the only character that felt like they were saturated in color helped a lot. Her being the first, like, truly monstrous enemy, you know? Like, she is uniquely monstrous. Like, Mater or Mater is interesting in that she's very, like, abyssal. And then you have the dragons, which are very, you know, beastly. There was something unique in the monster style of Romina. I don't think any other boss, even the base game, quite holds on to. There was something amazing about the colors she got to use. And there was something just about the vibe of her implications about the lore of the rot that made me realize that maybe Kaled and Melania don't fully represent what the rot god, lore-wise, was all about, you know? Yeah, basically, I found her mechanically to be just good enough not to drag her down, and visually, aesthetically, lore-wise, to be the peak of the DLC for me. Alright, y'all. Basically, I'm at the point where I think I'm just repeating myself to people who ended up coming in a bit later. But still, Melania is actively rejecting the rock god. She is embracing it. The thing is, Romina isn't even just embracing it, because if you look at her spell for the butterflies, I'll even fucking go pull it up. Romina spell description Elden. Let's see what we can get. If I can get the spell fucking description. Flame cleanse me. Knight's lightning spear. Pest thread spears? No. One of flies. Okay, maybe I just gotta look up. Okay, Romina, I'm gonna just look up her remembrance, because it's on her, it's on one of the spells. Remembrance. It's into the bud. Where's Divine Beast? Which one? I found the first Divine Beast to be okay, but it ran into a lot of similar problems for the hippo for me, because it doesn't have limbs or weapons. It was really tricky to tell what was a movement versus what was an attack. But I found its different, like, elemental phase changes to be pretty cool. So the default, like, normal one is right here at the top of C. However, the second Divine Beast that gets to start incorporating the Death Blight, I put into B. If this Divine Beast had been not just Death Blight and then go back to Lightning, Wind, and Ice, but had been, like, Death Blight, Poison, Sleep, like, if there had been a status effect one that was fully committed to that, I think I would have put him into A tier. But for what he was, he ended up just living in B tier, with the other one being C tier for me. Oh, one sec, I'm still trying to... Rotten butterflies, here we go. Incantation used by Romina, Saint of the Bud. Summon a myriad of butterflies while performing a gentle twirl. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. The scarlet butterflies are as the goddess of Rot's wings. Bereft of a master, they were soothed by Romina, who reached out to them. So there was something about the lore where it's like she didn't just embrace the rot, she offered something to the rot that the rot seemed to be like fully missing. There was something about Romina, because like not just Melania fighting the rot, but in Caelid and in the underground areas, the rot is presented as like that putrid, horrid, all vile sort of stuff. Like the pools of rot, the rotting beasts and stuff like that all just give this fully negative vibe beyond the path of rot. But Romina is the very first and only rot-related enemy that I think pulls up the whole rot into new life sort of thing, which nothing in the base game did, and not just because Melania was fighting it. Like, even the rot creatures that are dedicated to rot in the base game never do anything to bring up the other side of it. Maybe. But alright, y'all. I think that is all we are going to be doing today. I finished up my tier. I've got this, posted it. I'll share it on Twitter as well so people can yell at me about how dumb I is. But I think that's all we've got for today. I want to thank you all for coming and hanging out with me. I really appreciate y'all showing up and letting me rant about my very narrow and specific opinions about the Elden Ring DLC bosses. And I wish any of y'all still fighting them all of the luck in the world. And I hope y'all come to the same correct conclusions that I have come to. Now then, who to send y'all off in a raid for? You know what? I'm feeling like looking up someone on the lower side of shit. Hold up. Alright, let's do it. VTubers, sort by views. I would agree with most of these. Good night. Alright, good night to you, little thing. And let's see. Find someone adorable. Is that an axolotl? Vox the axolotl? Hell yeah. Sending y'all off to an assassin axolotl.
There you are. Come on.
Let's see your
Help us
raid.
into the van. Hurry, Desmond. We need to go.
Here's our raid. We're gonna give y'all the
You'll have
full-on
your time, Warren's gonna
party
get what he
grade.
deserves.
Raid.
Promise.
So
Alright, y'all. Here's our raid message. Let's grab it and get ready to go. Remember to share your love, share your appreciation, and
I have to analyze those
hope to
tapes
see
for
you all
the
again
session.
just as soon as
Figure out what's
possible.
happening.
Not sure what I'll be doing tomorrow. I've got a couple of plans, but we will see what I can get prepped in time.
Wanna play around with
Now
the
then,
on the way.
I wish you all a good evening, good night, and a good fucking weekend. See you all as soon as possible.
Templars aren't our biggest threat.
Let's get ready to
Not
raid.
by a long-
In 5, 4, 3, 2, let's go, girls.